Welcome, everybody, to Millennials Are Killing Capitalism Live. I almost said the Imperial 80s. I'm doing too many shows these days. Really excited again for another conversation with Dwayne Monroe. It's good to be with you. Make sure to do the basic things and, like the video, share it on social media, get other people in here, subscribe to the channel if you have not already, and support us on Patreon. And if you missed it earlier today, today is October 30th, which is a day of great political significance for the Puerto Rican independence movement. And so we hosted a conversation early this morning, premiered it with a couple of Puerto Rican activists and organizers, going through the history from 1800 through 1958, right up until the Cuban Revolution. And so we'll have a part two of that in, next couple of weeks, I'm sure, to bring it from 59 to the present. But definitely check that out. Check out other stuff we've been doing this week. It's good to see everybody in the chat. So this is kind of the ongoing conversation that we're really honored that Dwayne Monroe is bringing to our platform these days, of talking about, what's going on in the world of so-called AI, and different trends, different kind of political developments, market developments, and so on. And so in particular, this one was kind of brought on by an article and some discussion he and I had back and forth about the American Federation of Teachers. And particularly, there's now this article, which is like obviously propaganda. I mean, whenever you see like people doing these, big mainstream pieces on AI, and you have multiple partners involved and so on, right? They're promoting their collaboration for a specific reason, right? And so we'll talk about that. Specifically, it's Microsoft, OpenAI, a company called Anthropic, and the American Federation of Teachers, on how to train teachers on the use of so-called AI, right? And for folks who don't know, Dwayne Monroe is a technologist with decades of experience in the US and Europe. He intimately knows how technologies the media describes as ethereal really work, where they come from, and how they are used in the multinational corporations and governments dominating our lives. He applies what he calls a noir Marxist lens, stylistically informed by the work of Raymond Chandler, analytically informed by Marxian materialism, to dissecting the tech industry, with special emphasis on Microsoft's plans and actions, which I'm sure we'll be discussing today. Dwayne has been published in Logic Magazine, The Nation, and maintains a blog, Computational Impacts, where he writes about the industry's latest moves and how we're affected by them. He's completing a book on the anti-worker purposes of AI called Attack Mannequins. We have a playlist that we've created now that includes the conversations that we've had with Dwayne, as well as Edward Ongweso Jr., which Josh did a interview with this year as well. So without further ado, Dwayne, it's good to be with you again.
Yeah, it's good to be here as well. Goedemiddag, as folks say here in the Netherlands.
Right on. So should we start with the article, just kind of pulling that up and
Yeah,
looking at it a little bit?
let's bring that up because it, as you mentioned in the intro, it brings together something that we hinted at or talked about relatively briefly in a previous conversation, in which we were talking about the AFT. And Microsoft at that time, I think it was Microsoft in particular, and OpenAI. It's the same cast of characters always. So yeah, let's bring that up and just take a look at the first paragraph, because I think that provides a good intro to what we're talking about. And let me just bring that up myself. So I'm going to read the first few graphs. They're pretty light. So San Antonio, on a scorching hot Saturday at 9 a.m. Antonio, dozens of teachers traded a day off for a glimpse of the future. The topic of the day's workshop: enhancing instruction with artificial intelligence. After marveling as AI graded classwork instantly, and let me turn my glasses off, and turned lesson plans into podcasts or online storybooks, one high school English teacher raised a concern that was on the minds of many. Are we going to be replaced by AI, with AI? That remains to be seen. But for the nation's 4 million teachers to stay relevant and help students use the technology wisely, teachers' unions have forged an unlikely partnership with the world's largest technology companies. The two groups don't always see eye to eye, but say they share a common goal: training the future workforce of America. And in the other paragraph, they mentioned the cast of characters, which is Microsoft, OpenAI, and Anthropic, as you mentioned, and that these companies are providing millions of dollars for AI training to the American Federation of Teachers. Now, it's important for us to be cynical, and I'm by cynical I mean cynical in the ancient sense, not the way that Americans always talk about it, and by which they mean, oh, why are you so cynical? You don't believe in, I don't know, love or something stupid. Always talking about. No, I mean aware. I mean savvy. In this article should tell any thinking person all they need to know, including the graph that starts with Microsoft, OpenAI, and Anthropic are spending millions to train teachers. Now, these are for profit. Well, OpenAI claims to be not for profit, and recently it was announced that Sam Altman, who has one of the most punchable faces I've ever seen, that they're going to that's OpenAI transition to for profit, as if it matters at this point. I mean, I guess in some legal terms it does. And Anthropic, that they are spending millions to train teachers. Now, why would for profit, that is to say, capitalist enterprises that hope to achieve profit, why would they spend money unless they're making an investment in the sector that they are propagandizing, into believing that the way that you now do your work, you as educators at all levels, is to use so-called AI. I mean, notice also in the article that it mentions grading papers, and let me clear my throat for just a second. Grading papers and doing other things that, of course, is the job of an educator. If teachers don't have the time to grade papers or the time to create lesson plans, that's a system failure of the bureaucracy and, of course, of education pressed under capitalism to not fulfill its true function, which, of course, is educating. Um, Teachers don't have the time, they don't have the resources. And so the scarcity is created, which then is supposedly addressed by the introduction of these systems into the classroom. And during a chat you and I had, you were mentioning that there were questions about the introduction of computers into the classroom, going back decades, really, because none of this is new. I mean, Apple, of course, donating, my God, when I was a kid, like Apple IIe's or something to classrooms. Microsoft has for a very long time been either so-called donating or making possible or making available at a cut rate its office products to secondary and university level education. And these companies aren't doing this, obviously, out of the goodness of anyone's heart. They're doing it to build a mindset within both the educators and the students, that the way to achieve your goals, your learning goals, or just learning period, is through a mediated technical infrastructure. I follow many academics on Twitter and Blue Sky, and what I've noted is that more and more people are alarmed as they begin to recognize that it's not even merely a matter of replacement, which is bad enough, the idea of replacement. It's that these companies are destroying education as a whole, because you cannot educate people using these systems. It cannot be done. But of course, the education sector is worth billions. And if they capture that sector, of course, then they have a captive audience, administrators, institutions, at all levels. And I would also say, to close this introductory statement, that this AI push goes hand in hand with the dismantling of higher education that we are witnessing under the Trump regime. And that is no doubt also occurring elsewhere because education, certainly in the United States, as we understand it, as we have come to understand it, was an outgrowth of the Cold War. Sputnik was launched in the early 1950s, and the United States, which had long had a very chaotic educational system, of uneven levels. Legislation was passed, and there was a propaganda push to increase the level of education of the average American so that the U.S. would be able to compete with the perceived Soviet advantage over the United States. Because, my God, at that time, American rockets were exploding, and here was the USSR sending a satellite into orbit. Clearly, something needed to be done. So this is what I call the beginning of the technocratic age. That is to say, that period of American history in which the technocrats dominated how things were done in the US, part of the liberal order. Well, that's falling apart clearly. And part of allowing that to fall apart is the insertion of these systems into the educational process, which damages it. And I would argue, and others are arguing, including many academics who are at the front lines, destroying it. There are reports of people generating using large language models so-called academic papers, but the papers are nonsense. And so you're polluting the body of work that is required for scholarship in all fields, including science and technology, which the U.S. has traditionally depended upon as part of what has allowed it to be dominant.
Appreciate that kind of introduction. I mean, I'll just share a little bit just to say that um, in my past life, I was a business and operations person for a number of schools over the years and was actually in the role at different places where I was responsible for purchasing.
Hmm.
And the number of tech companies and also like tech startups, I mean, this is an interesting thing too, is that like,
Hmm.
and if you were somewhat tech savvy person and you wanted to start up a company that you could eventually sell, right? That a a good industry to try to get your way into was schools. So rather than developing like a traditional video game or something like that,
Hmm.
you basically gamify, right? You know, mathematical,
Right.
mathematical standards
Yes.
or ELA standards or things like this, right? And then you try to convince school and administrators, look, these kids love playing games, like
Yes.
like this is how. And this stuff is rampant. I mean, I also was there during like kind of the early onboarding of smart boards, which are now like
Hmm.
just ubiquitous.
Hmm.
And I really saw firsthand kind of how there was all this effort, all of this money put into like the hard physical tech and then the
Such
software
as
around those
Chromebooks, like the push for Chromebooks, for example, and
Chromebooks. And
Mac
Chromebooks,
hardware.
yeah, and Chromebooks were heavily pushed, like during the pandemic, there was like a reality that you had to deal with, which was every school was required to have a program for virtual learning for students, right? And so then there was like, Chromebooks, there was getting students like internet cards, right? In case they like a 3G or
Mhm.
4G internet card in case they
Yes.
didn't have internet in their own home, like all of this stuff and all of this
Mhm.
language too around the digital divide, right? So like all of this language that's the idea of which is that like poor black and brown
Yes.
students don't have access to technology and access to the
No.
internet, which is like there are some material realities we could talk about on a
Yeah.
class basis and things like that, right? um but like the there's all these implicit assumptions here that like this is the way that students, that young people should spend their entire days, that
That's
like
right.
they already spend an inordinate amount of time when they're at home
Mhm.
on their tablets, on cell
Mhm.
phones, on their
Mhm.
computers, right? And then we take school and we bring that
Mhm.
same process into it. And yeah, I mean, there's that element of it. There's the element from teachers and as a
Mhm.
parent of like, you know, I sent you a thing, but like if you go to my kids' schools, there
Mhm.
are these lists of just like, resources, right? And
Yes, I saw that. Yes.
it's like 15
Yeah.
different computer programs that also are not integrated, right? So it's
That's
not
right.
like you can log into one and like access all of them,
That's
or
right.
and so it's also one of those things, like a lot of this is said, oh, it's going to make things easier for teachers. But it's like now you create all of this work for people to manage all of these platforms, to keep all of the
Yes.
information up to date, all of that. And so, I mean, interestingly, on one level, this is one of the things that AI is proposing itself to kind of resolve, right? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, you don't have time for grading papers. We'll grade the papers for
Mhm.
you,
Mhm. Mhm.
and then
Exactly.
you can just look at them to make sure we did okay, right? And
Right. In
so
which
anyways,
case you still have to do the work. But let's dig into this a little bit because one of the things I wanna get into a bit more deeply here is the political economy of this. And for those who may not be familiar with the term, what I mean is the intersection, or rather the fabric of economic activity, political activity, ideology, and so forth, that forms, the ideas and the actions of our time, having to do with economics, but also having to do with other things as well. And um, so let's start with the way that technology is deployed in schools, whether it's elementary, secondary, university, undergrad, what have you. Um, Companies such as Microsoft, which, as we've mentioned, is my uh, it's the beast I know the best. I'm like the guy in a Japanese film who's battled Godzilla many times. Um, I know you hear the footsteps. Oh yes, that's Gojira. But anyway, the companies, Microsoft and its fellow firms, they built their businesses upon selling technology to several cohorts or groups of uh, categories of customers. The consumer, of course. So people in the 1980s, you may recall, people may recall, there were commercials for like TRS-80 or Dell computers, and they would show a computer. This is before these home systems were networkable and before the internet was publicly available. There was an internet, but it wasn't publicly available at that time. The ARPANET, which preceded the internet, or the National Science Foundation network. Anyway, I'm geeking out. So the way that these were advertised was you would see typically a woman in a kitchen doing her recipes, right? It's like, oh, I can do my recipes on the computer, which of course is nonsense. You still have recipes in a book. What in the world did this expensive piece of hardware add to the mix? Um, but that's how it was marketed, and also, once spreadsheets and other things became available, then you could see a bit more useful work and that you could do with these standalone computers. Um, the second segment, the larger segment for corporations such as Microsoft, was what is called the enterprise, and that's where my professional background is, which is in large corporations that deploy very complicated computer systems, which form, as I've called it, the command and control layer of corporations, and then education. So the consumer market is I think it's understood by these companies that you're not going to sell to the average homeowner a complicated network and a rack of servers. That's just not going to happen. Corporations, of course, you have that market. Education is another sector to which you could sell complex computational infrastructure up to a point. But the challenge is that whereas in that middle layer I was talking about, the enterprise, you had professionals, people like me, who would vet, who would deploy, who would design, who would make decisions. This is before cloud kind of nullified that to a large extent. But there was a go-between of typically well-paid and highly skilled people who were acting as advisors to decision makers within these multinationals. Often they wouldn't listen because executives typically don't, but at least that tier of people, that group of people existed. In education, it's although there are educational departments, although there are people in IT departments in education, and they can be quite skilled, but it's not the same. And what I'm driving at here is that sector is more vulnerable to pure propaganda, because you're not talking to a layer of techies who may be looking at what you're saying with a jaundiced eye. And in a large corporation, there'd be many layers. I was in many meetings in which a sales team would come in and say, if you spend 500 million on this magic software, it'll solve all your problems. And then an executive might turn to me, like after the meeting, or sometimes even during it, and say, well, what do you think? And I would say, well, that's bullshit. And let me whiteboard why that's not going to work. And sometimes some of the cleverer executives would actually listen, and they would, not spend that money stupidly. In universities, and particularly in high schools and elementary schools, there might be one person, there might be two people. There's no layer to advise, and or someone who is listened to in the same way, right? And so these corporations know this. This is what I'm driving at. Microsoft knows this. They know that they don't have to get past a layer of senior technical people. They know that they can go straight to the university, to the high school, to the elementary school, to the administrators. They know that they can go straight to that layer and sweet talk them and give them a lesson. The message being, if you don't do this, you're going to be left behind. You're going to be left out. You don't want to be left out, do you? And now let's have this marvelous event, and we're going to give training for you. And of course, if no one is providing the educators um, with the background information, and we'll get to this later because there's some resources I want to point out to people to help them understand how to resist intelligently and organize themselves. But if no one's doing that, if no one's saying to the teachers, no, 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 here's what a large language model really is. Here's why you can't trust it. Here's why. And also, let's take a beat and ask ourselves questions about why Microsoft, why OpenAI, why Amazon, why Google, why any of them are making this investment. Do you really believe that they have your educational goals for your students um, top of mind or in mind at all? So abandon belief and begin to assess what you're being told, right? And it's difficult because if you don't have that background information, and if you don't have that technical advisory layer, to say, to whom you could turn and say, well, what do you think about this? And someone who has 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years of experience saying, no, I don't think so. And let me explain to you why. If there's none of that, and if your colleagues are all enthusiastic, some of whom, become internal advocates because they think naively, sometimes because they see opportunities to change their career. They think, well, this is indeed the future. Yes, AI. And as we've discussed previously, one of the things that makes this very difficult is that we exist in a uh, a bubble of ideology that says that um, anything that is technically proposed is possible. Techno optimism, and things must happen. Techno determinism. And so the entire AI sector benefits from this ideology, because if someone says, yes, like if Sam Altman with his punchable face says, oh, we're going to build artificial general intelligence. It'll surpass our, our intellects. The average person doesn't, has no one to turn to say, is that true? What is going on? They're not going to ask a cognitive scientist, well, what do we really know about the mind? Um, and the voices that make sense are drowned out by news stories. I mean, that ABC news story is terrible. It is terribly written. It is, there's not even a shadow of a doubt communicated in that story. So it's a sales pitch pretending to be a news story, right? Like, oh, some teachers have doubts, but no one wants to be left out of the future.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll bring in my family member at this point, so, I have a family member who, beloved, and as all family members are, right? Um, and he's the type of person who has been doing different versions of consulting work for probably 20, 15 years at least, right? um
Hmm.
has a PhD, teaches some college classes, but has what I would call trend hopped a lot of different
Hmm.
things within the consultancy world, as that world kind of almost mandates that you do, right? Because if
Hmm.
you're a consultant, you have to be you have to kind of look at what people are
Yes.
looking for in terms
Yes.
of consulting opportunities, right?
Exactly.
You can do it based on an expertise you have that's like kind of specific, right? But
Hmm.
another thing to do is to look for these new opportunities, right? Kind of opportunistic, which again, like that's a big part of the kind of ethos, I guess, around the consulting sphere.
That's exactly right.
And so he got trained to be I don't certified, right? You can certifiable. He got certified to train folks in how to use AI,
And,
right?
and by the way,
And
this is another part of the infrastructure, the ecosystem, I should say, of how this works. Because of course, the each company has its own certification
right,
system, right?
right,
And of course, now when I was beginning my technical career, there still are certifications in various technologies. These are useful because, of course, it gives you like a background and you have like a deeper understanding of how the technology works. But it also is designed to make you an advocate. So it's almost like the Catholic Church spreading across Europe, and then outside of Europe, in which you'd have bishops and sorry, not bishops, missionaries, who would then go to various locations, often accompanied, of course, by people who are armed, but or sometimes not. And then once you had a foothold in a community, then you could spread your message and your ideology. That's exactly what that person what role they're playing within the ecosystem.
yeah, absolutely. And so I was at a family birthday party with him recently, and we got to talking, and he's and I'm raising concerns about well, first of all, you keep saying AI. Like, do you even know what it is? And this sort of thing. And he acknowledges, of course, that there's some. He wouldn't say. It was very interesting the way that he would term these things. Or I'm like
Yeah.
slop. Like my terminology is very like sort of derogatory towards this stuff. But he's like, yeah, there's certain things, but wait until like give it a year. Wait till it'll be where it'll be in a year. Wait until you see what we can do in 3 years. If you're not doing it now, you're already 3 years behind, right? So this was the first marketing,
Yes. Exactly.
drop that he made.
Exactly.
And then we got into some because he's like, I'm teaching a class, an online class at a elite university, and I forget the term that he said, but he's like, it's co-taught by AI is basically what he said. And he's like, he's the
Mm.
guinea pig for this.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
he's like, he's like, yeah, it's going to grade all the papers. And I'm like, well, how does that go?
Yes.
And he said, I don't know yet, because I hadn't seen the first round of what it does. He said, but obviously I'll review all of its work and all of that. But I'm just like, in my mind, I'm like, there are so many ethical alarm
Yes.
bells that are going off, um and
And
just I mean,
let's be specific. I mean, automated grading of certain types of tests is not new, right? So you could have, I mean, people who've taken the SAT or so forth, you know that, you have you fill in answers to questions, and it's relatively straightforward, to automate the grading of that based upon the fact that that there's a very simple heuristic in which like A is wrong, C is right, that kind of thing per
I think he was
per
talking about
question.
papers though.
Right, and this is where it gets very dangerous, because then what that means is you're inputting people's written material into a chatbot, and then saying that, oh, well, the chatbot will determine if your answer is correct. And in order to be able to do that, the chatbot has to be able to reason. Like when people who've been to, say, university, back in the day, the little blue books, you fill in your answers. I have vivid memories of a history exam that went on for hours. It was about I think it was the Vietnam War, and so I had to know a great deal about the war, and I'm just filled the entire book. Now imagine if that all the text that I wrote was then turned over to ChatGPT to assess how exactly how, without contextual knowledge of history, is this chatbot able to assess the accuracy of the statement and also take into account the variations in people's writing styles and so forth. But of course, an actual teacher, an educator can read and say, oh, well, this is what, I understand what Dwayne's saying. There's different ways of starting sentences, different ways of communicating. And perhaps I'm being asked for my opinion on certain things. I mean, which the professor or the teacher would have to assess. And part of the fun of that was getting feedback from your instructor, saying, "Oh, well, this is an interesting idea. Maybe you develop this further." There's no way that a large language model can do that, right? Now, maybe they can mimic that. So I would be curious to know what this co-teaching is supposed to be, because if they're simply feeding the text in, it's a disaster.
Yeah, it also involved, I think, like the the AI presenting like him giving, "Hey, I'm gonna teach a lecture about this."
Mm,
The AI then preparing notes for him for that, that then he is
that's
going
even
to
worse.
review, and
Yeah.
so there's a lot of different layers to this, and I just wanna
Yes.
say it because it's something that people are going to have to deal with, and I think that
Yes.
this is one of the things that, I know we'll get to solutions later, but, like, what what bothered me in the conversation is that the impulse to just resist it, right? Which was like full
Mm,
my full body and mind and soul
mm,
impulse. This is like, why would you ever want that? I mean, a year
yes.
ago, everybody was complaining that students are using it and they see the kind of slop that students are
Yes.
creating.
Yes.
And he's saying not only should students use it and teachers use it, but the issue is not that they're using it, right? It's that they don't know how to use it,
You're
right? So
prompting it
so this
wrong. That's yeah,
your
that's what they always
your
say.
prompt your prompts are, you don't understand enough how to communicate with it, and you don't understand enough how to check its work and to correct it when it errors, right? And so it's it's taken as a given that you want to be working with it, that it is going to make mistakes, and
Mm,
your reasoning ability comes in at that point of you need to be the person then that cleans up after it, kind of, rather than, which also implies too that, like, you have all the baseline skills,
yes.
I mean, yeah.
Let's put this into material perspective. So what people are being told is that it's not good anymore because of the future. It's not good for a teacher and a student to interact directly, for a teacher to create a lesson plan, for a student to follow that lesson plan to learn, and then for the teacher to assess through conversation, through written examination, and other means, the time tested means, to assess how well the student understands the material. And perhaps the student has new ideas. Like, what if you were doing a physics course? What were you doing a science course in which someone may look at the classic work and say, this is, good work. But I think I have some new ideas to be tested. Um, None of that is possible if what is inserted into the entire workflow are text calculators, right? And another thing I will say is, in the background of all this, as we must always remember, are data centers burning power. So all of this unnecessary in order to drive profit to these companies that are at the, as Marx would say, the commanding heights of this sector, burning resources, water for cooling, electrical power, real estate, and so forth. Many people may be familiar with the fact that a lot of these data center expansions are being powered by methane gas generators, this sort of thing, which clearly is not good. So, all of this, and it's completely unnecessary except to one group, and that group are the tech companies who are deriving profit. And the immaterial, I'll phrase this a bit differently. One of the frustrating things for those of us who do resist this is that this is described and treated as if it comes from the air itself. And one of the reasons why I get salty when, and you did it a little while ago, but that's okay, when someone says AI wants this, is that there is no AI to want anything. Microsoft, Amazon, and the owners of those corporations, they are the ones who want. And the AI is the hammer. It is the hammer they're using, and the propaganda about the so-called AI that they're using to open these doors, and then fleece these organizations for cash, and then leave them completely destroyed. Um, who was it? Was it Lenin who said that the capitalists would sell you the rope with which you hang them? Well, they're trying to hang all of us at this point, and they're charging us for the rope.
Yeah. Yeah, with which you hang yourselves, right? Isn't that
Yes,
the quote? Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, no, absolutely. I mean, do you wanna go into some of these
Uh,
marketing materials?
Yes,
Like,
I
where do you wanna
do.
go?
I think
Yeah.
it'd be good to give people examples of the kinds of things that the companies are driving, because when we start with the ABC article, um, uh, well, actually, marketing hype disguised article, I think we also should just go through what these people are seeing. So let's start with the Microsoft material, and just take a look at that at a high level. We looked at this previously, but I think it bears repeating, which is that
I like that we can pull up the AI powered assistant to help us review
yeah,
their
yes.
their AI materials here.
Yes, always help. In Microsoft's case, we can just call it Super Clippy for those who remember Clippy. But actually, this is important. It's important to mention this AI powered thing because it also means that Microsoft is trying to minimize its workforce. You may have heard about Amazon's. I'm sure people have heard about Amazon's tens of thousands of people layoffs announced a day or so ago, and Jassy, who's I think the current CEO, claimed that it's because of AI. But of course, that's nonsense, because AI can't do the job of an actual Amazon architect. In any event, what we see here in this website is Microsoft's push. This is the kind of material that Microsoft presents to people, presents to educators, to convince them that they should be signing on. They should be partnering, as they say. And you notice that the way that they talk about their products and so forth. None of this is surprising, but I want people to translate this website in your minds. Understand that this website is only the blunt end of a spear, because in addition to the website, there are people, Microsoft representatives, as that ABC News article mentioned, meeting with people, getting together and creating, as you mentioned, with your family member, training people, and then therefore creating evangelists, which is a term actually that was used in the tech industry a number of years ago. Like an evangelist for a product. none of these things are new. None of these techniques are new, but they've been supercharged by the fact that by this push on education. And I wanted to mention something else, which is that in a previous conversation we talked about the fact that the tech industry is burning um, mountains and mountains of cash, building data centers, maintaining data centers in this push for AI. And they are not seeing a return on investment. That's another reason for this push. Now, let's I want people to understand that this is not just Microsoft. So let's take a look at the Amazon education marketing material next. So you have an example of how one of their supposed competitors talks about this. Now we enter the Bezos world, the wonderful world of Bezos. So AWS for education. Again, Microsoft Education, AWS for education. Very similar, of course. There's not much different here on that the tech stack is a little different because, Amazon has its own infrastructure. Accelerating cloud innovation for education. Um, and again, the idea is that they are, attempting to capture the market. Now, from the perspective of people who assume that these organizations are benevolent, all this seems quite innocent. Like, well, of course they market their product to, to schools. But again, the idea, what I want people to focus on is how they are trying to derive profit using products that do not actually fulfill the function that they claim, particularly when it comes to so-called AI. And there you have it, generative AI innovation in education, right? Um, Personalized course recommendation. So this, of course, is based upon assessing a student using certain metrics and then having the supposed AI system create a personalized course recommendation, right? Something that would have been done, that should be done by the educator. Now they're proposing that this be done by so-called AI, and so a very similar message, of course, to what Microsoft is proposing. Um, these pictures are always very friendly, right? Everyone's just nice and just normal middle class suburban people just doing their normal middle class thing. Um, yes, AI innovation with large language models, as we were talking about before. Um, Again, they are pushing, this particular technology in an attempt to make it the standard for the creation, for the alleged teaching, for the assessment of student performance and activity, and what they are taught. Um, Recently on Blue Sky, someone posted a picture of an image that was presented to I believe it was their daughter, who's in middle school, and the image was about water, but it was complete nonsense. But it was an example. A striking example of the use of these generative systems, as they're called, to to create course material, which was completely in error. Um, and one of the concerns everyone should have is that, you know, uh, what are children being taught if this becomes the standard, if this is not stamped out? And I don't mean that lightly. I don't say that lightly. Like, it has to be completely halted, like not tolerated at all. Um, um, Children will be taught nonsense. Um, University courses will be nonsense. Science will come to a complete halt. This is OpenAI's, I believe this is, chat.ep, ChatGPT edu. Just again, slappable. The Yeah. So anyway, this is OpenAI's foray into this world. Um, how campuses are using it today. I want to encourage people to study this work, study these websites, because they will tell you how your enemy, and I'm not joking, how your enemy moves, how your enemy, what your enemy is doing. And also, if you are an educator who is dismayed as you should be, with what's happening in your spaces. Study these websites, because that is what your administrators are being told. And no doubt you're being told these things as well, but you're being told without assessing what the actual goal is, which is profit, and what the impacts are. As I said, I'm happy to say that I am noticing a trend of more and more educators who might have been on the fence, or might have been maybe a little light about this. Now that the rubber is hitting the road, and now that they're beginning to see, the actual impact, they're beginning to say, "Oh, this really is, not only is it crappy, but it's dangerous." Because it's one thing if, say, Samsung or Google provided you with Chromebooks that just allowed students to browse the web. It was bad enough that, yes, they were still tied to their devices, but that did not prevent them from say, reading a good article. Now you're preventing them from actually having access to real information, in a way that the proliferation of devices or even software such as Microsoft's Office did not do. So it is another level of danger. I would argue.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some good comments in the chat. There's also, do you want to go to the kind of critical tools and the
Yeah,
responses?
because I don't want too much more time to go by. So
Yeah.
I let's focus for a bit on critical AI literacy, which is from a cognitive scientist and her colleagues who I follow here, Olivia Guest. This is really very, very fine work. And I think that everyone who is concerned about this, and who needs resources and a methodology for resisting, should follow this work, study this work, join the groups that are discussed here, read the papers that are posted here. Because what the critical AI literacy document does is it provides you with the background that you need to be able to speak intelligently about this, to speak from a position of knowledge, and also to resist from a position of knowledge. In one of our previous conversations, you asked me um, for examples of unions resisting the push of AI into their workspaces. And at that time, what I said was that what the Screen Actors Guild had done about a year or so ago was the way forward, because one of the key things that SAG did was worker education. What is so-called AI? What are the studios trying to accomplish using so-called AI? What is their game plan? And how do these technologies actually work? The industry, the Microsofts, the OpenAI, the Anthropics, the Googles, they want you to believe that what is happening is so incredibly subtle, so beyond your understanding, that it's pointless to tell, mere mortals what it is. This is a way for them to present themselves as if they're gods, right? Because they're the high priests who have control of and access to. But it's also a way to obscure and blunt action. And what um, Dr. Guest and her colleagues have done here is created this beautiful resource, which I think can be used, should be used around the globe, but particularly in places such as the United States, where I think there is a severe lack of organized resistance in educational spaces to this push, and a severe lack of background information, somebody providing people with the information they need. I suggest that people download this, study this carefully, use this as an educational tool, build your own programs around this critical AI literacy program. This can be your counter program, your counter propaganda, because propaganda of itself is not bad. It's, we all need propaganda. I think that all good Marxists certainly understand that. But the propaganda should be truthful, should be based upon truthfulness, should serve positive ends. This is beautifully formatted, as you can see, and very accessible. And yeah, in fact, I think that one thing I'd like to do in the future is begin doing some sessions with people around this, to guide people through this, because it's so wonderfully organized, and contains so many fantastic resources, and allows you to walk through what you should do and what you should know.
Yeah, that's great. Would love to host, more discussions on this as well. I saw there was a link in there also to uh this
Yes, yes, and that contains some related resources, and some, I think, organizations that you can join. So yeah, explore it. Yeah, the articles that people should read. Uh,
combining psychology with artificial intelligence. What could possibly go wrong?
yes, and yes, I mean, and the thing is that Dr. Guest, she's a cognitive scientist, and one of the things, and she actually teaches, computational, the use of analytical tools, of algorithmic tools in the study of the mind, right? So she knows the difference between, she and her colleagues know the difference between, what the human mind can do and what these machines can do. And actually all of us really do, but we're being propagandized out of believing our own eyes, our own experience. And what Dr. Guest and her colleagues have done, I think, is provide, as I said, like a nice coherent method of resistance. But about psychology, these companies are assaulting on multiple fronts. So, for example, psychologists, well, they're saying, well, there's really no need for, mental health professionals. You can just use a chatbot, right? So, one of the things I want people to take away from this conversation is that if you feel assaulted and confused, and beset, it is because we are at war, right? War has been declared on us by these companies, by capitalism itself in its death throes. But speaking specifically of this sector, by these companies, they have declared war on all forms of human knowledge, that do not serve their interests, because they're desperate, and of course they don't care about the future, but we do, and so this is why it's so important for us to strap up, to gear up our minds to be able to intelligently push back.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's so much, like, I don't think people understand also the degree, well, educators do, and I
Yeah.
hear it from, but like the amount of de-skilling that's
Yes.
going on to the
Yes.
younger generations right
Yes.
now, and how intentional and sophisticated that process
It is
is.
intentional. This is an important point, and this is definitely something that Dr. Guest and others are emphasizing, which is the fact that the de-skilling is intentional. And let's return to an earlier part of our conversation when I talked about the beginning of the technocratic age, starting with the launch of Sputnik in the early 1950s, and the United States, deciding at that time, or elites in the U.S. deciding that the populace needed to be better educated, and capitalism needed a better educated workforce in its earlier stages. So, public education was tolerated, as being necessary, for people to be able to do things they needed to do. Um, these companies and many capitalists no longer believe that. Now they're wrong, but they're making a bet, and their bet is that they will be able to surveil, produce, control, and punish using computer systems. They can certainly surveil, they can certainly assign punishment, and they can produce in some ways, but not others. I mean, there'll never be like an AI dentist, for God's sake. But but that is their bet. And one of the things we must understand is that the elites with whom we are confronted and who are waging war on us, they are not necessarily sane at this point. There is a deep psychosis. I mean, this is probably something that, I don't have. Well, I have evidence for it, but I'm not a clinician in this way. But I do believe that we see strong evidence that the people who are in charge, of the world, sadly, are even more psychotic than previous generations and have all sorts of really strange beliefs, California has much to answer for, in particular Silicon Valley, much to answer for, because there are many delusions and fantasies that are now being that now they're attempting to put into action through computation. And I think that this is one of the reasons why they're assaulting us in the way that they are, because they believe that they can now do without us. I think that there is a firm belief in elite sectors that that most of the human population is surplus, and that they can just live in some kind of science fiction world. Again, they are wrong, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to try and immiserate us in the process, and destroy, de-skill young people who then are facing a technological world that they don't understand, um, and will treat these systems as if indeed they are from the gods, right? Um, uh, yeah, I think that de-skilling is a key part of this, and you know, graybeards like me who know where all the bodies are buried, we're a nuisance, because you can't fool us, but a 15-year-old you can, if you get them early enough, right?
Yeah, you can, and you know, I mean, my family member. I mean, there's a lot of people who
Yeah.
will buy into this. I mean, it was funny even the other day, and I meant to send it to you, but I didn't want to derail this conversation with it. But
Hmm.
one of the really bourgeois publications that I kind of follow to see what they're talking about, Foreign Policy Magazine or whatever, which is just an imperial think
Yes.
tank's,
Yes, I actually
like
get
rag.
subscribe to just to get notifications from them, and all the
Yeah,
headings are always hilarious. How China will stumble.
for sure. But they have this thing of like analyzing the AI bubble, right? Because
Hmm.
they're also like, what's going on here,
Yes.
economically, like doesn't make any sense right
Nvidia's
now. And
market
so,
cap, um, Nvidia's market cap is now, I'm told, like 5 trillion, which is
yeah.
which is an indication of like sheer madness, right? So so people are putting their eggs in a basket that is economically unviable, environmentally unviable, de-skills. I mean, there's literally nothing good. The entire thing is just rotten. Yeah.
So let's share the other one. You had this other website as well. Let's
Hmm.
see. Is this
So
it?
this is a paper
Okay.
by Dr. Guess and her colleagues. It's a long list, so we won't go through the name, but I do recommend that people also read this paper, which is against the uncritical adoption of AI in higher education. This is an important paper, because, and I think it's tailored to academics in particular, although it's accessible to anyone, and it's advising people on how to respond, in higher educational spaces, because the sharp end of the spear is indeed the attack on the universities.
I think, let's see. Do we have the right? Let me make sure I have the right link there, because I think it's might be the wrong one that I pulled up.
Let me see. Yeah, yeah, the one that you shared. Yeah, against the uncritical adoption of AI technologies in academia.
Yeah, it's not the right. The link I
Oh,
have is taking to something else. So
let me
if you,
see.
yeah, if you send it in private chat, I'll update it in the show description.
Oh, that's strange. All right, let me take a look real quick.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no
actually,
worries.
it is going to something different. How odd.
Right on. As you're doing that, I'm gonna look at some of the comments in the chat
Hmm.
too. So, back in 2014, NY had a bailout initiative to issue $2 billion in debt to create smart classrooms. When
Mm.
COVID hit, there were no laptops, and none of this tech had improved outcomes for students. Yeah, I mean, this is part of the thing too with all of this is that um, once you get invested into this, and this is part of the why companies like Microsoft or whatever, or Dell or any of them,
Yes,
work so hard for schools, is that they know that the hard technology, is only going to be good for like 3 years
that's right.
probably with student use,
That's right. That's right.
and then the the software, they can get you on, recurring license agreements. You don't
Exactly.
ever actually own
Exactly.
the programs that you buy, right? And so you have to pay them, and they can readjust the pricing every year. And you will do contracts and those sorts of things, but it becomes a kind of very self-perpetuating thing for school districts where, or like people were talking about charter schools, which it is true. This is like heavily marketed to charter schools because there's
Hmm.
even a smaller layer of people you have to convince, and it becomes a good pilot for these companies to say, oh yeah, we do this many schools, or we do this many
Hmm.
students, or we do this many
Hmm.
so they're able to sell it as their sort of pilot program to districts and so on. And they get in the door, and then then as an administrator get stuck in that simple or that difficult decision of, do I keep shelling out all of this money
That's right.
and actually increase these costs year over
Exactly.
year, or do I abandon it and then maybe look stupid because I
That's right.
bought something that actually isn't worth the money that we're spending on it? And then
Yes.
also face that, like, now, nobody likes a change in their job of,
Hmm.
like, teachers like, well, you trained us all on this platform and we got
That's
all the
right.
students used to it, and they're doing it for 30 minutes a day at this time, and like then you take it
Hmm.
away, and like, what are you replacing it with?
That's
Now I
right.
have to plan something else. So like all of these dynamics internally start to happen once they get their foot in the door too. So yeah, I mean, appreciate
And the
that
sales
comment.
and the sales teams know this. They know this. I mean, this is something I'm accustomed to in the corporate environment, in which um, you understand that sunk cost fallacy. In other words, the people will pursue, good money after bad, to avoid embarrassment. They'll continue spending millions, to say, well, to avoid saying I was wrong. So, to your point about how they function, this is something I wrote several years ago, and when ChatGPT first became a thing, and there's a graphic that I created a little further down in the document that I think is helpful, because it shows, I believe, how yeah, that graphic there, because this was something that when I first saw. Um, ChatGPT growing in prominence, like how were these companies planning to make money? And it was is that what Microsoft, for example, is trying to do is be like the super rentier, kind of the landlord of landlords, in which and in partnership with OpenAI, although that partnership is strained these days. And so you have, in addition to the majors, the big guys, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, there are other companies such as Anthropic, which of course has built its platform on one or more of the big guys' cloud platforms, and then sells. And so this gets us back to the ecosystem that we were talking about earlier. There are many, many, many salespeople, many organizations trying to sell. So educators are under a great deal of pressure because the phone is always ringing, the email is always pinging. The texts are always on the WhatsApp text, the LinkedIn messages, they're constantly flowing of organizations, from the large corporations, and then from the feeder organizations that that depend upon them. And this is what makes it so very difficult, for. And then, of course, to add to in the ideological backdrop, the belief in techno-determinism and techno-optimism. And this is what, to be fair to people, this is what makes it so difficult for people to resist this. And then I also dropped the proper link to the paper there. So let's just bring that up for just a little bit, um, so people can see what that. Yeah, there it is. That's the correct paper. So this is another paper that I am recommending that people study and use in their resistance efforts. Um, a nice list of academics who co-authored this paper, but it just gives people, as I said earlier, these are just really powerful resources to help you organize your thought, because you can't. it's fine to say, okay, this stuff sucks, but we actually have to have an understanding and therefore a plan.
Yeah, no, absolutely we do. And I think it's like, it's one thing I think because, like you said, like you could just be, I mean, I don't want to, the Luddites had some things right, I think. So I'm not like,
I think they got most things right. I can't think of
but
anything they got wrong.
but these types of pejoratives are kind of thrown at you,
Yes.
right, as like
Yes.
you're being regressive, as you said, the techno determinism, the techno optimism, like
Yeah.
you're demanding that people go back. I mean, I feel like the old man yelling at the cloud all the
I
time
know.
because like both it's a good metaphor in this case because the IT cloud as well. But
Mhm.
I don't it's difficult for me to know how my children are doing
Yes.
in school these days
Yes.
because of all of the layers of technology that
Yes.
are set up actually between myself and my child's teacher,
Yes.
and because teachers unfortunately have also been like kind of programmed away
Yes.
from an understanding that used to be quite dominant, which is like you can just call the parent up. You
Yeah.
can just like we could just have a conversation, like we could have a little meeting, like
Yes.
you can like physical progress reports used to come
Mhm.
home and this kind
Mhm.
of stuff, right? And
Mhm.
all of that is gone. Even
Yeah.
even like I mean, my high school student knows quite well, my high school son, how to keep information away from me
Sure.
on how he's doing in school, right?
Sure.
And you can, like yeah, you can log into the Power School. It's not updated. Like, this information is not it's not accurate. So then it spits out bad information to
Mhm.
parents,
Mhm.
tells them their child is like failing when really they have a B because like the teacher
Mhm.
hasn't graded all the assignments, right?
Mhm.
So it looks like there's all these zeros. Like there's all
Mhm.
these things that these programs
Mhm.
do, and it's maddening. And I
Mhm.
always talk about with my kids, and they give me the like, oh yeah, back in the day when you used to have to walk up and to school both
Both in
ways,
both the ways, yeah, uphill both ways, yeah. In the snow.
you know but I'm like, paper used to come home, and I know like
Yeah.
that, there's the whole environment, but all this technology is not environmentally like
And I
beneficial.
would say, there's something else, and because it is natural, at least in the West, in previous, in other societies and in other times of human history, perhaps not so much, but certainly in the West, in which people have been marketed into believing that there's a group of people, the young, who just know everything, and once you hit a certain age, you don't know anything, which is weird. Particularly for me, because there are people who will say to me that, "Oh, you must be so impressed with all this technology." I'm like, I haven't seen anything that is any better than what I saw in 1990. There's processors that are, more powerful, and therefore you can do other things with software. But no, because what I expected when I was your age was a transporter, and we can't build it. So I'm not impressed. But the belief is that there is progress and there's change, and there can be refinement, but progress is a belief that you leave behind the past, and this is a particularly Western and maybe even a really particularly American idea that the past is gone. And the tech industry takes advantage of this because I am convinced that the anti-boomer stuff that we really saw a few years ago and continue to see to some extent is mostly a counterinsurgency. Because what does it do? But cut younger people off from historical knowledge, right? So tech companies can say what we've done in the past 2 years is incredibly new. There's that nothing's been done like it before, and then someone like me will say, well, they're using ideas that were developed in 1950 or the 1960s or whatever. Like, no, 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 they have more computing power available to them. That's the difference. But most of the mathematical concepts and so forth were developed quite some time ago. Um, so anyway, yeah, I think that uh, uh, what you're facing as a parent is a terrible situation, because now, as you say, you can't determine, which is something that is key, something I have fond memories of, like, the conversations with my family about how I was doing in school, and why, and some of these were uncomfortable conversations, and others were great, right? Like, hey, this is what I'm really into. um, Now you're being deprived of that. You're being deprived of that because of a damn system that is then, money is going to a corporation, to put this system in place that, as you said, isn't even accurate.
Yeah. And somebody said in the chat, a very valid point. I think it was Chidi Macha was talking about how, like, um when Power School got rolled out, I don't think I saved it, but basically that,
Hmm.
many teachers said, I'm not doing that
Yeah.
because it will generate all of these calls from parents. And, like, there is something to that as well. Like, I actually don't need to know at every moment
Mm,
how my child is. Like, I do think there was something to being a kid in high school
mm.
and, shit, I got a bad grade on that assignment, but I'm going to work hard to improve my grade by the time my
Yes.
progress report comes out, so that
Yes.
when that comes out,
Yes.
I show it to my parents and, all is well in the world. And
Yes.
that
Yeah.
actually instilled something in me of a kind of self-motivation around
Yes.
things, because I also had some autonomy to do it without my parents being like,
Yes.
why do you have an F in that? And then my kid saying like, well, no, he hasn't graded it yet. I turned it in. Like,
Yes.
these kind of, like,
Yes.
micromanagement behaviors
Yes.
also that can come around on this stuff that don't actually encourage, like, um, a healthy relationship with kind of
Well,
teen autonomy and stuff like that either.
that's part of the theme of the society, though, right? Micromanagement, surveillance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Micromanagement, surveillance, but also inaccuracy. So you're saying, here's this system, that allows us to surveil, because that's really what we're talking about here, surveillance, right? Under the guise of, being like, grading and giving parents data. But and actually, this is an important point to mention, is that these systems are very brittle. There's an old term in computer science: garbage in, garbage out, right? And my God, this must be, I don't know, 50, 60 years old, but it's as true today as it was when it was first coined. Um, but the theme of our present moment is the use of computation for enhanced surveillance, micromanagement, but also the fact that these systems that are being used to surveil and to micromanage are often not accurate. And also break, or damage, relationships, in this way, right? Or create complexities that don't need to be there. And another factor is that this takes advantage of the fact that parents are, overworked, distracted, busy, concerned about the financial condition, concerned about the world that their children are inhabiting now and will inherit, right? All these things are actually what the factors that allow companies to then say to educators and to institutions, yeah, this will help, this will make things easier, we'll take this off your shoulders, this burden off your shoulders. Many things would not be sellable if people had the gift of time, because you would say, well, I don't need that, because I have time to talk to my kid, I have time to do these things. Educators would say, well, I have the resources I need to teach, there's enough teachers here, there's enough books, there's enough, resources for us to do what we need to do. These things are sellable because they're being sold to a world that is unraveling. This
Yeah,
is another factor too that we must consider.
absolutely. And we've all been, put on these devices that we're all addicted to,
That's right.
in some way or another, right? And
That's
so
right.
that then takes away our time and our attention, right?
Yes,
I
we're
mean, that
wasting time on the devices themselves, in addition to the time that we were already losing. I mean, I freely admit that, as much as I enjoy some aspects of this techno stack, as we all do, part of me looks forward to the day when the data centers go dark and we have to figure it out. We have to, like, figure out what comes next after being frightened and confused. Like, oh, maybe you need to do
yeah.
something else.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm gonna read through some comments from the
Hmm.
chat. As someone that got automated graded assignments on Canvas, that shit will never work.
I agree.
um, Chitty Matcha, there's the slick part of the tech testing in charter schools where students input massive amounts of data about themselves and
Mm,
families that have nothing to do with schooling needs.
mm,
By
mm.
testing, I mean testing the tech, not school
Yes,
tests, right? And so,
exactly.
like, yeah, there's a ton. I mean,
Yes,
this is also, gosh, it's a huge push, been a huge push in education since really the Bush era,
yes.
W. Bush, with No Child Left Behind and all of this. But
Hmm.
the big drive towards data driven education and having
Yes,
so many data points on
yes,
kids, and then the way that then became this huge in, I'm sure intentionally, I'm sure they were a part
yes,
of the planning of all of this for tech
yes.
companies as well, of like, hey, you got all that data, well, you got to be able to maintain it, you also need a secure
That's
architecture to
right.
maintain it in, all of these things, right? And you know yeah.
With it always comes, and this is true of the corporate environment as it is for education, there's always an infrastructure and an ecosystem. You simply can't have, a product. You have a surrounding group of systems and products that you have to purchase along with it, and then you need support, of course, right, for these systems. And I'm glad that that was brought up about the testing, because the companies do use their customers as what's called beta testers for their products, which they will present as being perfected and ready to go. But they have all sorts of bugs and problems and also things that they want to do. It's also really important. I'm really, really glad that what was mentioned was the gathering of data about the families. Because again, this gets us back to the themes of our era: surveillance, micromanagement, but also inaccuracy. So we have a system that, and I mean a political system, a political economic system that is working overtime to have greater and greater control over the populace. As things become tougher and tougher, because the natural inclination of people is to think some new thoughts and maybe take some new actions. But it's important that that not happen. To maintain the system. Why a friend of mine recently applied for a job, and the job application asks them questions about their roommates' political orientations, their roommates' sexual orientations. This is absurd, of course, but this is the theme of our era, which is I must know, I being the organization, must know everything about you. And of course, you say, well, but for what? And I think that part of it also is to have, in some cases anyway, blackmailable information. But they're trying to create like this web of data. Now, as we mentioned in the previous conversation, data is not weightless, right? It has weight and a cost, which is in data centers. And so this is one of the reasons why the data center growth has been what it is. And this is another reason for educators, I think, to be wary, because you're putting your faith in something that I think is already brittle and is showing signs of cracking. Everyone's familiar with the AWS outage, the Amazon Web Services outage. Microsoft Azure had an outage, lasted several days. You're putting your faith in systems that are under increasing stress, and so you must be able to continue your work without depending upon these companies.
I can't tell you the stories of when the Wi-Fi or the server or our internet connection went down in
Mm,
schools in the
mm,
21st century,
mm.
and the the fear, the
Yes,
panic on
yes,
those teachers' faces, and the
yes,
amount of yelling that they
yes,
did at our
yes.
poor IT guy.
Right. Yeah, people get very emotional, and you try to explain, I have nothing to do with it. I don't control the internet. But people are because they're, as you say, there's a panic, like, oh my God, I'm cut off from my ability to think, right? And this is before so-called AI, when when people were just searching for stuff, so
Yeah.
as the military says, the AI systems are a force multiplier of effects that we've already seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I've also seen articles that prolonged use, this is related to AI, can
Yes.
negatively affect the brain. I'm sure that's
Yes.
something that comes up in some of the resources that you shared as well.
Absolutely, yeah, because these, as I said, Dr. Guess is a cognitive scientist, and others are cognitive scientists, and psychologists and others have been studying the measurable effects of the prolonged use of these systems on our thinking, because thinking is, I think we were told as children, like, the brain is a muscle. Well, the brain may not be a muscle, but thinking, thinking requires constant use. I as you know, I write. I'm a writer. One of the things that one of the promotions, or one of the supposed use cases for these systems, is to help us write. And I tell people who are writers to reject that, because there is no such thing as writer's block. Someone recently said on I believe it was Blue Sky. There's no such thing as writer's block. You're working through a process of trying to think through how to communicate. And if that means that your brain has to take some time to assemble the ideas, well, that's part of thinking. But by the time you get the words to paper or on the screen, you've thought through what you're trying to say. And if you shortcut that by using a large language model, then you are cheating yourself out of thought, and you are damaging your ability to think.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, that's one of the big issues I have with it, with students using it, also
Yes.
with teachers using it, is just
Yeah.
like that whole process is so important, and so like, I anyway, yeah, I don't want to continue on down that rabbit hole,
Yeah.
but yes, exactly what you said. Um, Shout out to Russell Schultz III. Co-teaching involves your content being stolen, and shortly
Yes.
afterward, the teachers losing their jobs. The
Correct.
AI then
Yes.
providing a terrible educational
Yes.
experience.
That's exactly right. That's
Um,
exactly right.
and this is, we should say too, like, even it in there's a lot of data at this point about online schools and about
Yes.
virtual learning in general, and it does not work, right? Part
Yes.
of one of the major issues, and I appreciate the comrade who said earlier as we were talking, like, the pandemic is not over, we're still in it.
That's correct. Yeah.
Which is correct. But part of what I was saying is, like, the period at which we were pushed into either virtual or then hybrid kind of
The
learning.
lockdown periods. Yes.
Right, exactly. That then in those, and I'm not saying that that was the wrong choice, just to be clear.
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
but that in those settings, that there's all this discussion about, like, learning loss, right, that took place. And, like, obviously this is compounded by a whole bunch of factors, like kids
Mhm.
growing up in a world in which things are literally falling apart and they're watching their
Mhm.
family members die, and all kinds
Mhm.
of things like this. But
Mhm.
another factor, which is also shown by long-term evidence on, like, online charter schools and things like this, right, is just that kids do not learn as well when they are spending their day at a machine on,
Yes.
even if they have a teacher on that machine who's a human being who's talking to them,
That's exactly right. Yeah.
and
I
so, yeah.
when I think back on how I learned difficult topics, it was by, of course, reading, but also, having a group with whom I could interact, and then, of course, having really good teachers to help you to understand the material, So it was interactive, and didn't involve any kind of, computer metrics, or a mediated experience via computation at all. It wasn't necessary. Um, and I know that there are people who say, well, that's back when dinosaurs walked the earth. But the point here is that not everything that is new is good, and many of the things that are presented as new are being presented to you by corporations that are trying to fleece your pockets, right? So, yeah,
Just, this was a good comment. I didn't mean to cut you off there,
no,
but
that's fine.
just the loss of
Tactile learning,
tactile
yes,
learning, physical
yes.
notes, using tangible initials. I mean,
Earlier,
there's
yeah,
also the impact of just being around, like, what is your relationship to your classmates,
yes,
right? And how is this further mediated by
yeah.
technology, right?
Exactly. Well, earlier I talked about the classic blue book, right? And also, and to that I would add, like, just as the person said, taking notes, the act of taking notes, because it meant that I had to listen. Sometimes, asking the teacher, could you repeat that, or I'm not quite clear on that, and taking notes based upon that, and reviewing your notes and recalling what you learned, and then speaking with your classmates, about that. Um, all of these things lost, and I would say, finally about this, that the United States, and I'll focus on that because it's the land of my birth. The United States, depended for a long time on its dominance, was based in no small way upon having a coterie of people who had certain skills, technical skills, organizational skills, and so forth. And I don't know how, not that I wanted to, but I don't know how you maintain an empire if you don't have people who know what they're doing, on purpose. Now, of course, corporations, capitalism as a whole, doesn't care about the future. And it certainly doesn't care about, it only cares about the US empire to the extent that it served its interests. And now that it's retreating, and I think that some of the attacks on neighbors in the hemisphere is a result of the US retreating from its global commitments, because it can't maintain them anymore. It's no longer even seeing a need, to train these people, to train people to be able to do these things. It'll just run on fumes. It'll just use the equipment that it has, the nukes that it has, and then, and let the devil take the future. Essentially, I think that's the attitude. Um, and of course, that doesn't mean that educators, are trying to preserve education for the sake of U.S. imperial goals, but I'm trying to paint a picture of the backdrop of why these things are happening, and why it's absolutely necessary to make alternative plans.
Absolutely. Yeah. Other folks have brought up the environmental impact and all of that, which, I definitely recommend if people haven't seen
Hmm.
it. Like our first conversation in particular, we
Hmm.
spent quite a bit of time there. Um, you know, Peter Thiel will pay for his crimes. This was a question somebody actually asked me, Dwayne, and I don't know whether this is true or not, but they said, why isn't Thiel more involved in the AI sphere?
He is
Um,
involved. He is involved.
okay.
He is involved, but he's involved in a way. The rich people that you need to pay, to be wary of are not not the showboats, but the people who move in the shadows. And people know who Teal is, but many of his operations, many of his things are in the shadows. So, for example, Palantir is positioning itself as the premier provider of surveillance technology, and also as a partner, as they say, to the military. And so, he is very much involved in this, but in a different way. I wouldn't be surprised if he has investments in this space as well. But I think that his primary focus, his organization's primary focus, is on um, helping elites in a declining U.S. can control a restless population, and uh, terrorize its neighbors.
Yeah. No, yeah. If you want to watch scary stuff, just like log on to Palantir's website and watch
My
like their
God.
marketing videos.
I mean, the marketing videos, there's nothing. I mean, earlier, another video, we looked at Microsoft's marketing material for its data centers and so forth. And it's like typical, Southern California, like nice people, everybody's smiling and so forth. No, 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 not for Palantir. Like
No.
if you like if there were commercials being played in Mordor as they were going towards Mount Doom, they would be Palantir commercials. Like even
We
Sauron would
watched
be like, "What the hell?"
we watched one of them in one of the conversations with Felicia Deneau,
Mhm, mhm.
yeah.
Yes, I remember that.
Um,
Yes, yes.
yeah. All right. One can be both correct about the state of schools and an old man yelling at
Well, that's
clouds.
true.
I
That's very
aspire to be
true.
both.
That's true. It's very
A
true.
few people are upset about that. They want their teleporter, mad about it. Robot to do the cleaning. Where's it at? You can pry my jetpack from my cold dead hands.
A
Justice
tech
for the poor IT guy. Patrick, I will
mm.
avenge you. I'm sorry that they did that to you.
Oh
I
my.
don't always ascribe to this. Usually, my thinking through happens after the words have come out, unfortunately, which is,
We all have our process.
Francis, I love this. For the past year, I've been teaching students to take effective handwritten notes, and I'm back to old-fashioned physical
Good.
blue books
That's fantastic.
and
Yeah.
handwritten comments for them. I think
That's
that's great.
fantastic. That's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. There was a good, actually, I mean, this was, again, this is like BS propaganda, and it's probably was created to like sell the there's like these devices you can put cell phones in, right, that like
Mm.
that don't actually work because all the kids need is like a magnet, and then they can
Yes.
they can reopen it. But
Mhm.
uh I had to put my phone in one for a Raphael Sadiq concert I went to recently, which was great. But um there was a promotional thing on like one of these news stations about schools that have like banned cell
Mm.
phones. And
Mm.
I will say, like, I you always have to read this stuff, skeptically and
Mm.
cynically, like, but I believe that the students were very genuine in how
Mm.
much more they were enjoying education without their devices with them, and
Distracting them. Yeah.
their relationships with their peers as
Yeah.
well. Like,
No
you
doubt
know,
after a period of adjustment, like, and
of
being
course,
grumpy about it, but then going, "Oh, okay. I see the benefit."
yeah. After
Yeah.
the first 2 days of like, severe dopamine withdrawal in which they were like asleep and drooling on the floor, then they came to and had a great year with each other. But yeah, absolutely.
No, I have to check out. Are there any other questions you wanted us to get to?
No, I'm ready to head out, Dwayne. This has been great.
Yeah.
The Raphael Sadiq show was great, and he made us put our phones away because he wanted to talk shit
That's
about Dawn
nice.
from In
Yeah.
Vogue and everybody else. So
Oh, that's cool. Oh, that's cool. I put those phones away. I got some
um
shit to say.
yeah. But yeah, anyway, Dwayne, this was really good.
Yeah, thank
I
you for
hope
having me on.
people will no, it's always a pleasure. I hope people will share it. Maybe one last thing you could say
Mm.
just for a second. Why would AFT do this? Like, what is your assessment of like that?
Well, I think that I mean it's a stupid term, FOMO, but like many stupid terms, it does reflect an actual thing. There is indeed like a fear of missing out that some people have. I've seen it, in corporate environments in which, like some senior executive at a Fortune 500 is doing something because typically he, thinks that, well, the other guy's doing it. So you're like, well, is that, aren't you, why are they paying you 20 million? Is that your decision making heuristic? But sometimes it is. And I believe that in addition to what we've talked about, which is the propaganda, the marketing, and so forth, there is indeed a feeling that, well, maybe I am missing something. And maybe, because it is difficult in any society, it is difficult to go against whatever the current, wherever the current's flowing. It takes a particular kind of person, in particularly in a decision making role within an institution to go no, because even if say one person or multiple people say no, there's going to be so much resistance to that no. And then of course Microsoft and others are waiting in the wings to, to tell people what people to take them out to a steak dinner, and do things like that, and which that's not even a rounding error for them. Not even a
Yeah,
rounding error, and so that this is why I think that uh, they can convince themselves, as we humans always can talk ourselves into doing things that are against our interests, and we come up with elaborate excuses, and we fool. I think it was Jean-Paul Sartre, the term bad faith, but which is misused because in Sartre's case, it's part of it is fooling yourself, right? Like you're lying to yourself. And I think that's a big part of it. All those factors together.
yeah, absolutely. Well, next time maybe we'll jump into some of these like critical resources a
Yeah,
little bit deeper.
that'd be fantastic.
This
That'd be
has
fantastic.
been great. Really appreciate it, man. And shout out to the chat. Thank you. Make sure to Make sure you've liked the video, subscribe to the channel on your way out, support on Patreon if you want. Check out Dwayne's blog and the resources we put in the chat. And everybody have a great rest of your day.